There's something deeply unsettling about pain that refuses to leave. You wake up each morning hoping today will be different, that somehow the ache in your chest will have dissolved overnight, that the weight you carry will finally lift. But it doesn't. It sits there like an unwelcome guest who has taken up permanent residence in your soul, immune to your prayers, your efforts, your desperate attempts to think your way out of it. You've tried everything, haven't you? Therapy sessions that felt like intellectual exercises, self-help books that promised transformation in 10 easy steps, meditation apps that left you more agitated than when you started. You've thrown yourself into work, into relationships, into hobbies, into anything that might distract you from the persistent ache that seems woven into the fabric of your being. Yet here you are, still carrying the same burden, still asking the same question that has haunted humanity for millennia. Why won't this pain just go away? Carl Jung, the pioneering Swiss psychiatrist who spent his life exploring the deepest territories of human consciousness, discovered something revolutionary about persistent psychological pain. He realized that our suffering doesn't continue because we're weak, broken, or doing something wrong. It continues because we're unconsciously protecting it, feeding it, and in some strange way choosing it over the alternative that terrifies us even more, the unknown territory of who we might become without it. What you're about to discover isn't another quick fix or positive thinking strategy. These are 5 fundamental truths about the nature of psychological pain that Jung uncovered through decades of clinical work and personal exploration. These insights have the power to transform not just your relationship with suffering, but your entire understanding of what it means to be human. They reveal why your pain has been so persistent, and more importantly, what acknowledging these truths can unlock in terms of genuine healing and transformation. If you've ever felt trapped by your own emotions, if you've wondered why the same patterns keep repeating despite your best efforts, if you're ready to move beyond surface-level healing into something deeper and more permanent, then these 5 truths will fundamentally shift how you see your pain and your potential for freedom. Before we explore these life-changing insights, if you're someone who values deep psychological wisdom over superficial solutions, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. This channel is dedicated to exploring the profound truths that can genuinely transform how you experience life, and every video builds on these foundational concepts that can change everything about how you relate to yourself and your healing journey. Now let's uncover why your pain won't go away, and what Jung understood about the hidden mechanisms that keep us trapped in cycles of suffering. The first truth that Jung discovered, and perhaps the most difficult for modern minds to accept, is that your pain serves a psychological function you're not consciously aware of. This isn't victim blaming or suggesting that you're choosing to suffer. It's recognizing that our psyche, in its infinite wisdom and complexity, sometimes uses pain as a protective mechanism against something it perceives as even more threatening: authentic growth and transformation. Jung observed that many of his patients had developed what he called a neurotic equilibrium, a psychological state where suffering provided structure, identity, and predictability. The depressed person knew who they were within their depression. The anxious individual had learned to navigate the world through the lens of their anxiety. The traumatized soul had built an entire worldview around their wounds. While these states were painful, they were also familiar, and familiarity, even when it hurts, often feels safer than the unknown. Consider how pain can become a form of psychological camouflage. When you're suffering, the world expects less of you. You're excused from taking risks, from pursuing dreams that might end in failure, from engaging fully with life's demands and opportunities. Pain becomes a shield against the terrifying possibility of discovering what you're truly capable of, or conversely, what your limitations actually are when all excuses are stripped away. Jung noticed that some individuals unconsciously clung to their suffering because it provided them with a sense of specialness, depth, or moral authority. The wounded artist, the sensitive soul, the misunderstood visionary, these archetypal identities carry a certain romantic appeal. They suggest that your pain is evidence of your depth, your sensitivity to a world that others cannot fully perceive. This psychological investment in suffering as identity makes healing feel like a kind of death, a loss of what makes you uniquely you. But here's where Jung's insight becomes truly profound. He discovered that this protective function of pain operates entirely below the threshold of consciousness. You don't wake up in the morning and consciously decide to maintain your depression, to avoid life's challenges. Instead, your unconscious mind, in its attempt to protect you from perceived threats, creates elaborate psychological defense systems that maintain the status quo, even when that status quo involves significant suffering. The unconscious mind, Jung realized, operates on a different logic than consciousness. It's not concerned with happiness or even well-being in the conventional sense. It's concerned with psychological survival, with maintaining coherence, with protecting the organism from what it perceives as existential threats. If stepping into your full potential feels more dangerous than remaining in familiar pain, your unconscious will choose pain every time. This truth is revolutionary because it shifts the entire framework of healing. Instead of asking, how can I get rid of this pain, the question becomes, what is this pain protecting me from? Instead of seeing suffering as a problem to be solved, it becomes a mystery to be understood. This shift from victim consciousness to curious observer consciousness is the beginning of genuine transformation. Jung found that when people began to explore the hidden functions of their pain with compassion rather than judgment, something remarkable happened. The pain began to loosen its grip because it was no longer needed in the same way. When you can consciously choose growth despite fear, your unconscious no longer needs to use pain as a protective barrier against that growth. The second truth Jung uncovered is that your pain is inextricably connected to parts of yourself that you've rejected, denied, or refused to integrate. He called this rejected material the shadow, and he discovered that our relationship with our shadow directly determines the intensity and persistence of our psychological suffering. The shadow isn't just our dark side, as it's often misunderstood. It's everything about us that doesn't fit our conscious self-image, everything we've decided is unacceptable, inappropriate, or dangerous to acknowledge. For some people, the shadow contains their anger, their selfishness, their sexuality, their ambition. For others, it might contain their vulnerability, their need for love, their creative impulses, their desire for recognition. What makes the shadow so psychologically powerful is that it doesn't disappear when we reject it. Instead, it goes underground, operating from the unconscious where it influences our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors in ways we don't recognize. Jung observed that shadow material has a peculiar quality. It becomes increasingly powerful and destructive the more we try to deny or suppress it. This is where persistent pain often originates, when we've spent years or decades pushing away aspects of ourselves that feel threatening or unacceptable. Those aspects don't quietly disappear. They become autonomous complexes within the psyche, operating like separate personalities that sabotage our conscious intentions. They create internal conflicts that manifest as depression, anxiety, relationship problems, creative blocks, or a general sense that we're fighting against ourselves. The person who has always prided themselves on being positive and optimistic might carry a shadow full of legitimate anger and disappointment. This rejected anger doesn't disappear. It turns inward, creating depression, or outward, creating passive-aggressive behaviors that damage relationships. The individual who has built their identity around being strong and independent might have a shadow full of vulnerability and dependence that creates anxiety whenever they need to rely on others. Jung discovered that this splitting of the psyche is one of the primary sources of neurosis and persistent psychological pain. We're literally at war with ourselves, using enormous amounts of psychic energy to maintain divisions that ultimately serve no one. The conscious mind exhausts itself trying to maintain an image that excludes vital parts of our nature, while the unconscious rebels against this artificial constraint. But here's the transformative insight. Shadow integration isn't about acting on every impulse or abandoning moral boundaries. It's about acknowledging and accepting the full spectrum of human nature within yourself. It's about developing a conscious relationship with aspects of yourself that you've been unconsciously fighting against. When Jung worked with patients on shadow integration, he found that their persistent symptoms often began to resolve. The depression lifted not because they became more positive, but because they could acknowledge and integrate their legitimate negativity. The anxiety decreased, not because they became more confident, but because they could accept their vulnerability as part of their humanity. This process requires tremendous courage because it means dismantling the carefully constructed image of who we think we should be. It means acknowledging that we contain contradictions, that we're capable of things we don't want to admit, that we have needs and desires that don't fit our idealized self-concept. But this acknowledgement paradoxically leads to a kind of psychological freedom that no amount of positive thinking can provide. The third truth Jung discovered is perhaps the most challenging for our culture to accept. You cannot heal through willpower alone. The Western mind, with its emphasis on control, achievement, and rational problem-solving, wants to approach psychological healing like any other project. We believe that if we just try hard enough, think positively enough, or apply the right techniques consistently enough, we can force our pain to disappear. But Jung understood that the psyche doesn't operate like a machine that responds to conscious commands. It has its own intelligence, its own timing, its own mysterious processes that cannot be controlled or manipulated by the ego. He observed that genuine healing often happens not when we're trying to heal, but when we're engaged in something entirely different, living authentically, creating something meaningful, or developing a deeper relationship with our own soul. This insight challenges everything our achievement-oriented culture teaches us about personal growth. We're told that healing is a matter of finding the right therapy, reading the right books, practicing the right techniques. While these can certainly be helpful, Jung discovered that they often fail to produce lasting transformation because they approach the psyche as an object to be fixed rather than a living system to be understood and respected. The psyche, Jung realized, heals through the relationship between consciousness and the unconscious, between the ego and the self, between the individual and something larger than themselves. This healing relationship cannot be forced or manufactured. It emerges naturally when we create the right conditions: genuine self-acceptance, patient attention to our inner world, willingness to sit with uncertainty, and respect for processes we cannot control. Many people spend years in therapy or self-improvement trying to eliminate their symptoms through force of will, only to discover that their efforts often backfire. The more intensely they focus on getting rid of their depression, the more depressed they become. The harder they try to overcome their anxiety, the more anxious they feel. This isn't because they're doing something wrong. It's because they're approaching their healing with the same controlling mindset that may have contributed to their problems in the first place. Jung introduced the concept of what he called active imagination, a practice of engaging with unconscious contents through dialogue, imagery, and creative expression rather than trying to control or eliminate them. Instead of fighting against difficult emotions or trying to think their way out of psychological pain, individuals learn to approach their inner world with curiosity and respect. This shift from control to relationship, from fighting to collaborating with the psyche, often produces profound changes. People discover that when they stop trying to force their healing and start engaging authentically with their psychological processes, transformation begins to happen naturally. The depression doesn't disappear because they commanded it to. It transforms because they developed a different relationship with the parts of themselves that were depressed. This doesn't mean becoming passive or giving up all effort. It means recognizing that the most important work happens not through force, but through attention, not through control, but through understanding, not through elimination, but through integration. It means trusting that the psyche has its own wisdom and its own capacity for healing when we create the right conditions. The fourth truth Jung uncovered is that your pain often persists because it's connected to a larger story about reality that you're unconsciously committed to maintaining. We don't just experience isolated symptoms, we live within complex psychological narratives that give meaning to our experiences. These stories, which Jung called complexes, operate like autonomous personalities within our psyche, each with their own agenda, emotions, and worldview. For example, someone might carry a victim complex, a psychological structure built around the story that the world is fundamentally unsafe, that people cannot be trusted, and that they are powerless to change their circumstances. This complex isn't just a belief. It's an entire way of organizing experience that filters perception, influences emotions, and shapes behavior. The person with a strong victim complex will unconsciously attract situations that confirm their story, interpret neutral events as threatening, and respond to potential opportunities as if they were dangers. The insidious aspect of these psychological complexes is that they create their own evidence. If you unconsciously believe that you're unworthy of love, you'll sabotage relationships that challenge this belief and cling to situations that confirm it. If you carry a story that success leads to isolation, you'll unconsciously undermine your achievements or feel anxious when things go well. The complex maintains itself by ensuring that reality conforms to its narrative. Jung discovered that these complexes often form in childhood as adaptive responses to difficult circumstances. A child who experiences betrayal might develop a complex around trust that protects them from further betrayal, but also prevents them from experiencing genuine intimacy as an adult. A child who is criticized for their sensitivity might develop a complex around emotional expression that shields them from judgment, but also cuts them off from their authentic feelings. The pain persists because dismantling these complexes feels existentially threatening. These psychological structures don't just protect us, they define us. They tell us who we are, how the world works, and what we can expect from life. Even when they cause tremendous suffering, they provide a sense of psychological coherence and predictability that the ego values more than happiness. This is why intellectual insight alone rarely produces lasting change. You can understand cognitively that your beliefs about yourself are limiting, but if those beliefs are embedded within powerful psychological complexes, they'll continue to operate automatically below the threshold of consciousness. The complex has its own emotional charge, its own memories, its own way of interpreting reality that exists independently of your rational understanding. Jung's approach to working with complexes involved what he called active imagination, engaging directly with these psychological structures as if they were separate personalities. Instead of trying to argue with or eliminate a complex, individuals learn to dialogue with it, to understand its perspective, to appreciate its protective function, and gradually to negotiate a new relationship with it. This process often reveals that complexes contain not just limiting beliefs, but also important psychological energies that have been trapped or misdirected. The victim complex might contain legitimate anger about injustice. The inadequacy complex might contain sensitivity and humility that could become genuine strengths. The abandonment complex might contain a deep capacity for independence and self-reliance. When we can consciously engage with our complexes rather than being unconsciously controlled by them, transformation becomes possible. The complex doesn't disappear, but it transforms from a rigid psychological prison into a source of energy and wisdom that serves our growth rather than limiting it. The fifth and final truth Jung discovered is perhaps the most profound. Your pain will persist until you're willing to encounter what he called the self, the deeper center of your being that exists beyond your personal history, your psychological wounds, and your ego identifications. This isn't a spiritual bypassing of psychological work, it's the natural culmination of genuine psychological development. Jung understood that most psychological suffering stems from a case of mistaken identity. We believe we are our thoughts, our emotions, our personal history, our wounds, our achievements, our failures. We build our entire sense of self around these temporary and changeable aspects of experience, and then we suffer when they don't provide the security and meaning we're seeking from them. The self, in Jung's understanding, is the archetype of wholeness and meaning that exists at the center of every individual's psyche. It's not something we create or develop, it's something we discover and align with. It's the part of us that remains constant despite all the changes in our external circumstances and internal states. It's what some traditions call the soul, others call the true nature, and Jung called the self with a capital S. The journey toward the self isn't about transcending human experience or achieving some perfect state of enlightenment. It's about developing a conscious relationship with the source of meaning and wholeness that exists within our own psyche. When we begin to experience ourselves as something larger and more stable than our psychological wounds, those wounds naturally begin to heal. This process, which Jung called individuation, involves a gradual shift in the center of psychological gravity from the ego to the self. Instead of deriving our sense of identity and worth from external achievements or internal states, we begin to experience ourselves as connected to something timeless and universal. This doesn't eliminate personal challenges or emotional difficulties, but it provides a foundation of meaning and stability that allows us to navigate life's inevitable ups and downs without being overwhelmed by them. Jung observed that people who had established a conscious relationship with the self possessed a quality he called religious attitude, not necessarily involving traditional religion, but involving a sense of connection to something sacred and meaningful that transcended personal concerns. These individuals could face suffering without being crushed by it, could experience joy without being attached to it, and could navigate life's complexities with a kind of inner compass that didn't depend on external circumstances. The encounter with the self often happens through what Jung called numinous experiences, moments of profound meaning, connection, or insight that reveal the deeper dimensions of our being. These might occur through dreams, meditation, creative expression, time in nature, deep relationships, or simply moments of profound silence when the noise of the ego temporarily subsides. But the self isn't just accessed through peak experiences. It's available in every moment when we're willing to step back from our identification with thoughts, emotions, and personal dramas and ask, who or what is aware of all this? What remains constant while everything else changes? This shift in perspective from being lost in experience to being aware of experience is the beginning of self-realization. When individuals begin to access this deeper dimension of themselves, their relationship with pain transforms completely. They don't become immune to suffering, but they're no longer imprisoned by it. They can feel sadness without becoming a sad person, experience fear without defining themselves as fearful, face challenges without seeing themselves as victims of circumstances. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen through techniques or mental strategies. It emerges through a gradual process of psychological development that Jung called individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming who we truly are beneath all our conditioning, wounds, and societal identifications. The path of individuation requires tremendous courage because it asks us to let go of everything we think we know about ourselves and remain open to discovering who we actually are. It asks us to question our most fundamental beliefs about reality, to face aspects of ourselves we've been avoiding, and to trust in a process of development that we cannot control or predict. But those who undertake this journey discover something remarkable. The pain that once seemed so solid and permanent begins to reveal its transparent nature, not because it's eliminated or transcended, but because it's seen in proper perspective as one aspect of a much larger and more magnificent reality. Understanding these 5 truths about persistent pain doesn't automatically eliminate suffering, but it fundamentally changes our relationship with it. Instead of seeing pain as evidence that something is wrong with us, we begin to understand it as information about psychological processes that can be worked with consciously. Instead of feeling victimized by our emotional states, we develop the capacity to engage with them as temporary visitors in the larger space of our being. The healing that emerges from this understanding isn't the superficial elimination of symptoms, but a profound transformation in how we experience ourselves and our relationship with life. We discover that we are far more resilient, creative, and whole than we ever imagined. We learn that our capacity to feel pain deeply is inseparable from our capacity to feel joy, love, and meaning deeply. Jung's insights reveal that genuine healing isn't about returning to some imagined state of innocence or perfection. It's about developing the psychological maturity to embrace the full spectrum of human experience with wisdom, compassion, and courage. It's about learning to dance with life's inevitable challenges rather than being crushed by them. This transformation doesn't happen in isolation. It emerges through authentic relationships with others who are also committed to growth and truth. It develops through creative expression that allows the deeper aspects of our nature to emerge. It deepens through service to something larger than our personal concerns, whether that's family, community, artistic expression, or spiritual development. The journey Jung describes isn't easy, but it's the most meaningful path a human being can walk. It's the difference between spending our lives running from ourselves and learning to come home to ourselves. It's the difference between being a victim of our psychological processes and becoming a conscious participant in our own development. If these 5 truths resonate with something deep within you, if you recognize patterns in your own experience that these insights illuminate, then you're already beginning the transformation. Recognition is the first step toward freedom. Acknowledgement is the beginning of change. Acceptance is the foundation of healing. Your pain has been waiting for this moment, when you're ready to listen to its message, to understand its function, to integrate what it has to teach you. It's been waiting for you to develop the courage to face what you've been avoiding, the wisdom to embrace what you've been rejecting, and the maturity to become who you truly are beneath all the layers of protection and pretense. The path forward isn't about eliminating pain, but about transforming your relationship with it. It's about discovering that you are larger and more resilient than your suffering. It's about learning to live from the deepest and most authentic parts of yourself, where meaning and peace exist regardless of external circumstances. This is Jung's greatest gift to humanity, the recognition that within every human being lies the capacity for profound transformation, authentic wholeness, and genuine freedom. Your pain isn't your enemy, it's your teacher. Your wounds aren't your weakness, they're the doorway to your wisdom. Your journey toward healing isn't about becoming perfect, it's about becoming real. If you're ready to begin or deepen this journey, know that you don't walk alone. Every person who has ever lived has faced the choice between remaining unconscious and becoming aware, between staying safe and growing authentic, between protecting their pain and transforming their relationship with it. The invitation is always available, to step beyond the limited story of who you think you are and discover the vast territory of who you actually are. Your pain won't go away until you're ready to acknowledge these truths, but once you do, everything changes. Not because life becomes easy, but because you become capable of meeting life with the fullness of your being.